Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 2nd of January 2023. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please pause the video and check out the key on your screen at the moment. Let's get to the front line, and as you can see, another incredibly uneventful day in terms of pins on my map, terms of the source mappers showing changes to their mapping. This, I'm going to have to repeat myself, but it does seem like the Russians have, to some degree, culminated in their attacking phase here after the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And if that is the case, and bear in mind, we have only had like less than a week of relative stasis, but the last 3-4 days, it could be New Year, it could be the kind of Christmas period, New Year, but 3 or 4 days of not really a lot of movement at all. Maybe some more movement for the Russians in the Robotina area, but as you can see, none today. If that is the case, I think this tells us an awful lot. Now, we know the Ukrainians won't be in a position to attack, given that they have culminated after the end of their counteroffensive. Really, they ran out of ammunition, and that's one of the main reasons. Troops as well, I think they just need more troops. But if Russia have done so already themselves, then I think it shows really how expensive Avdiivka, Kupiansk, Krinky, and Novomykhailivka have been, and Bakhmut have been for them. I just think it's been an incredibly expensive period. Now, we went through the analysis of all those graphs that Dell put together yesterday, and I did the analysis of the Russian losses, and actually this would fit in with looking at those stats and analyzing them to the point where we saw that the attacking phase of the Russians over the last 2 months, really since October, 3 months, has been incredibly expensive in terms of personnel, the most expensive months, and in terms of equipment as well. They can't keep doing that, and I think their attacks have attrited them more than if they were soaking up huge amounts of Ukrainian attacks. They've just, as I keep saying, committed some kind of maneuver harikiri. If we look at the front line in the northeast, you can see there's no movement at all. That's not to say there won't be activities. There's no ISW that I could find, no ISW assessment of the front line being January the 1st. So that was New Year's Day. So that was yesterday. So last night they didn't have a report. I do have something to share with you, but I'll do that at the end. We can go to null reports that says in the Kupiansk-Sinkivka area, you see there's no real change to the mapping, no map changes. Russians, meanwhile, tried with another set of mechanized attacks to create a breakthrough into Sinkivka, but both failed and took heavy losses. But again, failed and took heavy losses. So that has been a real area of incredible expense for the Russians. They've lost column after column of mechanized equipment trying to break this line and get into Sinkivka. Again, if you're going to keep doing that, you're going to run out of momentum. You're going to run out of the ability to do that again. And I presume they've done that. Now, will they have enough troops to go again at some point soon? Quite possibly. There's talk about Bakhmut and Avdiivka, the Russians sort of regrouping there and gathering more forces. But those forces aren't going to be experienced troops. They are going to be green around the gills. They will be mobilized troops or troops coming straight out of training. So either straight out mobilization with a minimal of training or some kind of training back here in Luhansk or whatever. If they're brought to the front, then I don't think they're going to make the most difference, and it's just going to be more of the same. Russia seemed to be unable to innovate, and what they did earlier on in the war is what they did in the middle of the war and is what they're doing now. You look at what they did in Bakhmut. Is there any difference in tactic? Have they learned anything? Yes, they are adapting in terms of their usage of things like first-person view drones and the use of drones in general. They have got half-decent electronic warfare where it is working, although in certain places like Dnipro they've had trouble with that. But I don't see them trying anything particularly new or different. And when they are exhausting their equipment, they are also exhausting their options. They can't do that many different things because they just don't have the range or the capacity of mechanized equipment that they had 6 months ago, a year ago. Just it it doesn't look good. Even though I was feeling a bit down about the Russians inching forward, the fact that they haven't managed to make on those gains, I think is a real challenge for them. So anyway, coming down to Bakhmut, you can see again no changes to Bakhmut there. That area being quite calm in comparison to what we've seen in terms of territorial exchange. Right, no report says Bakhmut Bodanivka. There are some changes for his mapping, but I think he will be trailing behind people like Andrew Perpetch and Surat Maps that are much quicker to change their maps. In general, Russians are on the offensive and Ukrainians are trying to maintain positions. Russians have broken through the primary line of defense north of Bodanivka, taking the fight into the settlement, which we already knew, right? I think what has happened since then is actually the Ukrainians have pushed back in Bodanivka and have, as I've explained in the last couple of days, they have to put up a serious defensive line somewhere around here. And I think as soon as you start moving further to the west or southwest through Bodanivka, you're basically in Chasiv Yar, and that can't happen. So really, I expect the Ukrainians to fight really hard now to maintain the defensive lines where they are. I think it's quite dangerous how far the Russians have got down this Kromova road, the 00506 road, and I would expect the Ukrainians to really fight hard here. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they pull troops from this kind of area to help more defensively back here. I think this is more important to keep than it is to expand anywhere eastwards in this general direction. So I would, I wouldn't be surprised if all of this area was ceded eventually to the Russians, but I would be surprised if the Ukrainians let the Russians get through this line here. Okay, so that's just my speculation, my thoughts from some kind of armchair general point of view. As we come further to the south here, we can see there's a little bit of movement, some minor Russian gains, and can I just say again, thank you to JR who has done the mapping again today. Thank you very, very sincerely. Some very small gains, sort of tree line gains in that northern area, not as much as Surat Mats had previously stated. Nonetheless, the Russians are moving along the railway line whilst being unable to move through Stepova any further towards Badichi. And I think that, again, is good news for Ukraine. As I said yesterday, it's better that they hold here. They can lose some ground up here. I don't think it's going to make too much difference to the defense of Avdiivka. It makes a difference if they're able to come back round here. It's all about this main supply route coming in west to east into Avdiivka here. If the Russians are able to move down in that direction or move up in this area, then it's trouble for the Ukrainians. They can afford to let a little bit of land go up here, though, is my opinion there. So now let's look at some Warmap maps that I haven't really shown to you for a long time now. I do like the colours of Warmap. It used to be my go-to whole Ukraine map, if you remember, like a year ago. Anyway, Ukraine update for the last 3 weeks. So this is a 3-week update. Russia has continued its heavy attacks on the flanks of Avdiivka, successfully advancing near Pervomysky. Last week, President Zelensky visited the city, recording a video in the open, less than 2 kilometers from the nearest Russian positions. The Russians are famously claiming that was just green screen, though, of course. But here we can see the grey zones in all around, really, the whole of the cauldron. Some gains for the Russians up in that northerly area, but Warmap generally isn't as current as some of the other mappers that I use, like Surat Maps and again Andrew Perpetch and Deep State Map as well. Some gains around the Pervomysky area, but nothing we haven't already seen. Let's see what else they have in their mapping. Russia has advanced at multiple points west of Bakhmut, capturing positions Ukraine had previously rescued. They've also attacked into the fortifications on the hill above Klishchivka, which again, we've already known this, but you can see the two main areas of the Russian advance. We're also actually the Dacha area just south of Bakhmut as well. So that's the next map. And then we're going to come to, this is actually Kremina Forest, further up to the north, the Serebyansky Forest. Russians claims that Russians have gained in that area. So if we come back to my map, much further to the north, that general area there where there's a bit of a bridgehead, Warmap are claiming that there's some gains for the Russians there too. And then actually their next map is just north of Bakhmut. This is Vesely and Spurna, where between Spurna and Vesely, where the Russians have made some gains as well. I'm just showing you different maps just in case you want to see some new colours, brightening up your life with a bit of bright red and bright yellow. So that's that area where the Russians have advanced up the railway line. Really is being treated like a road in many respects, and then it's jumping all over the place. There's no kind of geographical thread to or order to this thread. Russia has carried out heavy attacks on the settlement in Sinkivka in recent weeks. So again, getting to the edge of Sinkivka, but so far Ukraine has been able to prevent them from capturing or securing a foothold in the settlement, and that is a pretty significant area in terms of Russian losses. And then we're going to go back to the next place on our map, which is moving down from Avdiivka, where we were, to Mariinka here. So Avdiivka past Donetsk, really, to Krasnohorivka and Mariinka, where the Russians have advanced past the lakes. This is just a bit of a synopsis of the last few weeks, right? So they have advanced both north, I mean, mainly stated north here, but also south, taking the whole of Mariinka and moving towards the next settlement along. Russia has successfully captured the remainder of the parts of Mariinka on the north bank of the reservoir. The whole settlement is now under their control. And then we'll go to Novomykhailivka, which is next on my map as well. Coming down here past Pobieda, where they're still fighting around there. That's a key little settlement, as I keep saying. Novomykhailivka hasn't changed at all. There seems to be sort of still both sides are jostling over the cemetery, this industrial area and that agricultural area, these three areas of the settlement just south. Warmap states that south of Mariinka, Russia has carried on a series of attacks over the past months on Novomykhailivka, pushing Ukrainian defenders back to the edge of the settlement, closing the buffer zone around Novomykhailivka off. And then we're going to go to the Robotyne area. So we'll come on down past Vuhledar, past Velika Novosilka, where there's been no change for quite a long time, and to Robotyne, where actually the Russians have had the most success in the last week, taking all of this ground in this southern part of the salient, parallel kind of with Novoprokopivka there. Warmap saying that Russia successfully recaptured some positions southeast of Robotyne, which Ukraine had secured during their counteroffensive in mid-23. But in the whole scheme of things, if you think about this whole best part of the year, we have seen Ukraine attack, take a bunch of land, not really a great deal of land, and Russia inching that land back from them. And we'll probably get back at the beginning of May to broadly where Ukraine started. Wouldn't it be interesting if that was the case? Or maybe not interesting. It's like a whole year's worth of fighting, and there might be effectively no change to the mapping really in a year, give or take a few kilometers here or there. But what will be significant is what totals you get when you toss up the losses. A year's worth of fighting, how much has that cost, both in monetary and also equipment terms, both sides? Have the Ukrainians been able to make the most use of that year, considering they were not given some of the weapons that they really, really needed and not quite enough of the ammunition they needed? They could still have made it count this year, like going up to May. Then really, Ukraine have done amazingly. all things considered. You know, they're fighting against the second greatest army in the world, and yet Russia has been, I think you can pretty safely say, utterly unable to achieve any of the goals they set out to. They haven't demilitarized Ukraine, far from it, the opposite. They haven't denazified Ukraine, which means, you know, exchanging their government, having a regime change. And they've not been able to secure the Donbass. In fact, you know, they've got nowhere near getting to Transnistria. So, and also, the Black Sea Fleet has been kicked out of Sevastopol, and Crimea has been pretty much hammered. So, you look at it from not from this zoomed in, oh my goodness, Ukraine has lost a hedgerow here, you know, that's depressing me that there's been like 5 hedgerows lost this week. When you look at the whole scheme of things, do you know what? Ukraine have done a pretty good job. Now, when ISW, they didn't release a daily report, but they did give a kind of, not quite a summary of the year, but a kind of where are we at? What are the lands that Ukraine must liberate? So, yeah, I'm not going to go through all of this. It says Russia will not abandon its maximalist aims for now or in the future, which I think is ridiculous because, as I keep saying, look how long it's taken them to take Bakhmut, right? So here we have, I don't know, let's measure that. Bakhmut, taken them over a year to get 25 kilometers. Over a year to get 25 kilometers. Okay. Now let's see what they have to do in order to, and bear in mind, this isn't their maximalist aims. This is just getting to Transnistria. 353 kilometers. 25 kilometers took them over a year. That's that area there. Perspective is really important. We mustn't get down about where Ukraine are. Goodness me, if I was cheering for Russia, I would be really depressed at the moment because they have been entirely ineffective. Just, yeah, pretty incredible. Anyway, so this report says Russia will not abandon its maximalist aims now or in the future. The forces required to defend Ukraine depend on Ukraine's borders, and we'll come to this in the conclusion. I won't go through all the details there, but yeah, the January 2022 lines are far easier to defend efficiently than the December 2023 lines. In other words, where the lines are now are more difficult for Ukraine to defend than basically the whole of Ukraine, or at least, actually, if you take into account Crimea and the Donbass, or part of the Donbass being taken. So if you take the annexed areas, if it was back to January 2022, before the war started, they were easier borders to defend than the current borders at the moment. So that might say something to you. And then freezing the lines unfreezes the forces. So if you freeze the lines, then those forces can be used. Talks about that. There's no space to trade. Talks about Crimea, Donbass individually. But let's just hop to the conclusion. And the conclusion is the most advantageous lines Ukraine could hold militarily and economically are its internationally recognized 1991 borders. So actually going back from the January 2022 borders, actually if they had the whole of Crimea and the whole of the Donbass, that's obviously going to be better for them militarily and economically. Any discussion of recognizing changes to those borders as concessions to try to persuade Russia to stop its unprovoked and illegal invasion must reckon with the heavy blows such concessions would make against core principles of international law banning wars of conquest, ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity, and many other moral and ethical principles that are central to a peaceful world. In other words, if you let Russia even have the annexed 2014 annexed areas, you are allowing an aggressor nation to just go and steal property, steal territory off another nation, and then still be able to sit on the UN Security Council. Is absolutely egregious, and it does make a mockery of all those things. Those, ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity, wars of conquest, moral and ethical principles that's central to the peaceful world. Russia have already taken a piss out of them since 2014, and allowing them even more land from there just makes it even worse. But discussions of such concessions are already underway, and so we have examined the concrete and pragmatic problems surrounding their implementation. Freezing the Russian war in Ukraine on anything like the current lines enormously advantages Russia and increases the risks and costs to Ukraine and the West of deterring, let alone defeating, a future Russian attempt to fulfill Putin's aims by force. In other words, if we don't do something about it now, you are setting yourself up for a future fall, because you haven't deterred Russia from doing this again, or any other nation. In fact, China and Taiwan. You know, it needs to be resolved, and it needs to be resolved in the favor of Ukraine. And if it isn't, Russia will have learnt, China will have learnt. The current lines are not a sensible starting point for negotiations with Russia, even if Putin were serious about negotiating a ceasefire on those lines. They are, rather, the necessary starting point for the continued liberation of strategically and economically vital Ukrainian lands, without which the objective of a free, independent and secure Ukraine able to defend and pay for itself is likely impossible. Now, if you are talking about going down a market and haggling over some kind of bracelet or something, right? And someone starts at this price and you start at this price and you meet somewhere in the middle. Generally how it goes. It wouldn't be how I do things. I'd start low, and then if they don't come down to where I'm at, I just walk away. But that's generally how it works. Now, if Ukraine and Russia were to sit down now, Russia are unlikely to say, right, what we want in these negotiations is more than we've already got. They're unlikely to say, and we want all the land from there to Transnistria, right? And that's what we want. And we want the whole of the Donbass. I don't think they can do that. So I think the maximal gains they can achieve in going to negotiations would be the territory they've got right now. And when you go and do those negotiations, start here, the other person starts there, and you go somewhere in the middle. So therefore, I can't see Russia really maintaining control, even in their best outcome of negotiations. Possibly why they're not really serious about negotiations, because they're probably not going to be happy with losing some of what they've already got. And of course, Ukraine are going to want their 1991 borders back. And so I can't see that negotiations, and Putin's not really signaling he's ready for negotiations realistically. All of these missiles that have been sent over in Shaheeds, I don't think he's that interested in negotiations. So I don't know. That's my tuppence on negotiations. I don't think either side are remotely ready for them. And I think we're more likely to see a longer, more protracted war take place before that happens. The other thing I just want to quickly mention is I wonder whether these massive waves might also be an massive waves of missile and Shaheed attacks might be an overcompensation for the fact that the frontline is ground to a halt, and he needs something to shout about. Putin and the Kremlin needs something to shout about to the domestic population, which is why the propagandists are shouting with glee about how wonderful these New Year's saturation wave attacks on civilian infrastructure are. Whoop-de-doo, how lovely. But of course, they can't shout really about anything else at the moment. They have had some small successes. That said, they might suddenly kick off again, and you might see Avdiivka fall. You might see more of Bakhmut fall to the south. You might see Chasiv Yar challenge more robustly. You might see the bridgehead in Krinky get pushed back, and that area near Robotny be ceded to the Russians. Who knows? That can all still happen, but they are looking like they have tried the same thing over and over and have just lost huge amounts of personnel and equipment, and are probably not in a great position to have their eye on taking huge amounts of territory above what they already have. Anyway, that's my more than tuppence. I reckon that's threepence of speculation for you. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. I really appreciate all of your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you tomorrow.